Clara was not the kind of woman who drew attention when she walked into a room. She liked simple things, dressed plainly, and carried herself quietly. On that bright Saturday morning, she decided to visit the local shooting range for the first time in months. She had not told anyone about her plan. For her, shooting had always been something private, almost like a personal meditation. It wasn't about showing off or competing, it was about the calmness she felt when she held a rifle and focused on the target. The shooting range she chose was one of the most popular in town. Many wealthy people came there, not only to practice but also to socialize and boast about their skills. Expensive cars were lined up in the parking lot, shiny and polished as if waiting for a grand exhibition. Clara's old, modest car stood out immediately, a little dusty and worn, yet reliable. She didn't mind. She wasn't here to impress anyone. When Clara stepped out of her car, she noticed how different she looked compared to the others. Men and women dressed in professional gear walked around confidently, carrying polished weapons in special cases. Their boots were shiny, their jackets branded, and their safety glasses expensive. Clara, on the other hand, wore a plain shirt, faded jeans, and sneakers. Her old rifle, carefully wrapped in a cloth case, hung from her shoulder. She knew people would notice the difference, but she had grown used to such looks in her life. As she entered the range, she felt dozens of eyes scanning her. Some people smiled politely, but most only glanced once and then whispered among themselves. She could already sense that many thought she did not belong there. But Clara kept walking, her steps steady, her eyes calm. She had no reason to prove anything to anyone. The atmosphere inside the range was filled with loud cracks of gunfire, the smell of gunpowder, and the buzzing of conversations. A group of shooters stood together, laughing loudly as they compared their latest shots. Clara recognized the type immediately: people who loved the sport less for its discipline and more for the pride it gave them. They measured worth by how expensive their rifles were and how many people noticed their performance. She quietly signed in at the counter, where the young clerk gave her a curious look. He seemed surprised that someone like her had come alone. "First time here?" he asked politely. Clara shook her head. "No, I've been to other ranges. Just trying this one today." He nodded, still looking uncertain, then handed her the slip with her assigned booth number. Clara thanked him softly and walked toward her lane. On her way, she passed the group of shooters she had noticed earlier. They were dressed in matching tactical gear, their rifles gleaming with new accessories. They laughed when they saw her cloth-wrapped rifle, one of them whispering loudly enough for her to hear, "Looks like Grandma brought a museum piece." The others chuckled, their voices filled with arrogance. Clara didn't respond. She simply kept walking, her eyes fixed on her lane. She had dealt with mockery before. People often judged her by her appearance and her simplicity, but she had learned not to let it touch her heart. Still, she could feel their eyes on her as she unpacked her rifle. Her rifle was old, but it had a history. It belonged to her father, who had taught her how to shoot when she was just a child. Every scratch and mark on it carried a memory. While others valued shine and new technology, Clara valued precision, patience, and respect for the weapon. As she cleaned the barrel with slow, practiced movements, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. Around her, the noise of the range grew louder. The group of shooters fired shot after shot, cheering each other on. Their bullets hit the targets, some close to the center, others not so much, but they celebrated every shot as if it were perfection. They wanted the whole range to notice them, and many did. Clara stayed focused on her task. She adjusted the stool, checked the sights, and arranged her safety gear. She didn't hurry. Every step was deliberate, every motion precise. But her calmness seemed to irritate the group nearby. "Hey, lady," one of them called out, grinning. "You planning to shoot today or just polish that antique?" Laughter followed his words, echoing in the range. Clara didn't even look up. She knew answering would only feed their mockery. Instead, she breathed slowly, her mind steady. Shooting, for her, had always been about silence and control, not noise and pride. A young boy standing with his father nearby noticed Clara and tugged at his father's sleeve. "Dad, why is she so calm?" he asked innocently. His father smiled slightly and whispered back, "Because some people don't need to rush. They know what they're doing." Clara caught the words, and they warmed her heart. Not everyone was blind to the truth. The range instructor walked by, checking each lane. When he reached Clara, he paused for a moment, looking at her rifle with mild surprise. "Haven't seen one of those in a long time," he remarked. "It still works fine," Clara replied softly, adjusting her sights. He nodded but moved on quickly, clearly not expecting much from her. After all, most people here believed skill came from the newest equipment, not from years of discipline. The mocking voices from the group grew louder, but Clara tuned them out. She thought about her father's lessons. He used to tell her, "The real shooter is not the one who fires the most shots, but the one who makes every shot count." Those words guided her every time she picked up the rifle. As she prepared for her first shot, Clara felt the same calmness she had always cherished. She was aware of the whispers, the laughter, and the judging eyes, but none of it mattered. She wasn't here for them. She wasn't here to compete. She was here to feel that moment of stillness between her heartbeat and the pull of the trigger. And though she did not realize it yet, everyone in that range would soon learn a lesson they would never forget. The air inside the shooting range was filled with sharp cracks of bullets striking targets, followed by the echo of laughter from the group of wealthy shooters. Their voices carried through the room like they owned the place. They had noticed Clara the moment she walked in, and their mocking hadn't stopped since. She could feel their eyes on her as she prepared her lane. Clara had been to many ranges before, but this was different. Here, the people weren't just practicing, they were performing. Every shot they fired came with an exaggerated gesture, as if they wanted applause. Their targets weren't remarkable, yet they laughed as though they had done something extraordinary. Clara quietly finished checking her rifle, her movements steady and deliberate. The mocking began softly, with whispers meant for her to overhear. One man, tall with a trimmed beard and expensive tactical vest, leaned toward his friend and said loudly, "Look at that old rifle. She must have found it in a garage sale." His friend chuckled, shaking his head. "She doesn't even have a proper gun case. Maybe she thinks this is some kind of carnival game." Clara heard every word, but her face gave nothing away. She didn't glance at them, didn't frown, didn't show irritation. She simply wiped the scope and placed it gently on the table. Her silence only seemed to encourage them more. Another woman in the group, dressed in fitted shooting gear with flashy glasses, smirked and called out, "Hey, sweetheart, do you even know how to load that thing?" Her tone dripped with arrogance, her friends laughing loudly at her joke. Clara remained calm, her hands moving gracefully as she slid a bullet into the chamber. The familiar weight of the rifle reassured her. The group erupted into more laughter. One of the younger men, eager to impress, raised his own polished rifle and took a quick shot at his target. The bullet hit close to the center, but not exactly. Still, he raised his hands as if he had won a medal. "Now that's how it's done," he boasted loudly, turning his head toward Clara's direction. "Don't worry, you'll get there one day." Clara adjusted the sight without looking at them. To her, their noise was like buzzing insects around a compound, annoying, but powerless to disturb the stillness inside her. Yet she could sense the attention of others around the range. Several spectators, including the young boy she had noticed earlier, were now watching the scene with interest. They, too, were curious to see how this quiet woman would respond to the group's arrogance. The shooters kept their performance going. One after another, they fired shots, boasting about their skills. Their laughter was louder than the sound of their rifles. "Maybe she's scared," one of them remarked loudly. "Or maybe she's just decorating the table. I don't see her doing anything." Another added, "Careful, guys, she might surprise us by hitting the ceiling instead of the target." Laughter rang out again, and a few people nearby shook their heads at the group's behavior. Some were amused, others uncomfortable, but no one intervened. Clara's fingers traced the wood of her rifle. Every mark and scratch carried years of memory. She thought about her father's steady voice guiding her hand when she was a little girl. "Ignore the noise, Clara. The world will always have people who talk. What matters is the silence you create when you act." Those words anchored her now. The group noticed her silence and mistook it for weakness. The tall man with the beard stepped closer to her lane, smirking as he leaned slightly over. "So, when are you going to show us what you can do? Or are you just here to watch the professionals?" His words carried an intentional sting. Clara finally lifted her eyes, just for a second. Her calm gaze met his confident grin, and for a brief moment, he faltered. There was no anger in her eyes, no sign of embarrassment, only patience, the kind of patience that unsettled those who relied on mockery to feel powerful. She returned her gaze to her rifle without a word, and that simple act seemed to annoy him more than any sharp reply would have. The woman in flashy gear decided to add her own mockery. "Maybe she's here for photos. Some people like to look tough for social media." She struck a dramatic pose with her rifle, her friends laughing again. Clara ignored them, continuing her careful preparations. Minutes passed. Clara still hadn't fired. She checked her stance, adjusted her ear protection, and looked down the sight again. Every detail mattered to her. Shooting wasn't a race, it was a dance between breath, focus, and silence. But the group was growing impatient. "Come on already," the young man shouted mockingly. "The target won't wait forever." His laughter echoed, joined by his friends. Others in the range began watching more openly now. Some were tired of the group's arrogance, curious to see if Clara would finally take a shot. The boy with his father leaned forward, whispering, "She's different, Dad. She doesn't look nervous." His father nodded quietly, his eyes fixed on Clara. The mocking reached its peak when the bearded man fired another shot that landed far from the center but still puffed his chest proudly. "At least I hit the board," he laughed. "Not sure everyone here will be able to say the same." He glanced at Clara again, expecting her to finally react. But Clara didn't flinch. Her breathing was steady, her body relaxed. To her, their noise was fading into the background. She could hear only her heartbeat, feel the rhythm of her breath, and sense the weight of the rifle in her hands. She was preparing not just for a shot, but for a statement, one that required no words. For the group of shooters, it was just another day of showing off. For Clara, it was a test of patience, of calmness under ridicule. She knew the right moment would come, and when it did, their laughter would end. And though they didn't realize it yet, every joke they made, every arrogant word they spoke, was only building the silence that her single shot would soon bring. Clara stood at her lane, her hands resting lightly on the rifle. Around her, the sound of shots echoed one after another, each followed by laughter and commentary from the group of shooters who had been mocking her since she arrived. Their voices filled the air, but Clara tuned them out. She had learned long ago that the louder people were, the more they needed others to notice them. She didn't need notice. She needed focus. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, taking a deep breath. In her mind, the noise faded, and she remembered the quiet fields where her father had first taught her to shoot. Back then, there had been no crowd, no voices to distract her, only the rustling of leaves, the whistle of wind, and the steady beat of her heart. That was the feeling she wanted now, even in this crowded range. She opened her eyes and adjusted her stance. Her feet spread shoulder-width apart, her back straight but relaxed. She brought the rifle to her shoulder, her movements smooth and practiced. Every step she took seemed slow to the group watching her, almost too careful, as if she were stalling. But Clara knew better. Each detail mattered. The way her body stood, the way her fingers rested on the rifle, the way her breath moved in and out, everything had to be in harmony. From behind her, one of the young shooters snorted. "She's taking forever. By the time she fires, we'll all be old men." His friends laughed again, their arrogance filling the room. Clara did not move. She adjusted the sight, lowering her head slightly until her eye aligned with the scope. She could see the target clearly now, though it still looked far away. She focused, narrowing her world down to the small circle of black in the center. The group fired again, their shots hitting in scattered patterns. Some were close to the center, but most weren't. Still, they cheered loudly after each shot, proud of themselves. Clara could sense their glances in her direction, waiting for her to fail so they could laugh even harder. But Clara's patience was unshaken. She lowered the rifle gently, testing her breathing. She inhaled slowly, then let the air out, her chest rising and falling in rhythm. She remembered her father's words, "The rifle follows your breath. Don't fight it. Learn to move with it." The instructor passed by again, watching her lane briefly. His brow furrowed slightly. He had seen many shooters, but few took this much time to prepare. He almost said something, but then noticed the steadiness in her hands and the calmness on her face. He decided to let her be, walking away silently. Meanwhile, the mocking grew louder. "Maybe she forgot how to shoot," one of them joked. Another added, "Maybe she's waiting for the target to walk closer." More laughter followed, their voices carrying easily across the range. But Clara wasn't listening. In her mind, she was no longer inside this noisy room. She was back in the open fields, her father standing beside her, his warm voice guiding her. She remembered the first time she had hit the center of a target. She had been no more than 12, her hands trembling slightly from the weight of the rifle. Her father had smiled proudly, not because she hit the bullseye, but because she had shown patience. That lesson had stayed with her. Now, years later, that same patience guided her. She lifted the rifle again, pressing it gently into her shoulder. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger, not pressing, not rushing. She watched the target through the scope, her body swaying slightly with each breath. She waited, breathing in, breathing out, finding the rhythm where her body felt stillest. The young boy watching with his father was practically on the edge of his seat. "Dad, she's going to do it now," he whispered, his eyes wide with excitement. His father smiled faintly, nodding. "Watch carefully. She's not like the others. She's not showing off. She's building something." The boy's eyes never left Clara. He didn't understand everything about shooting, but he could sense something different about her. The quietness, the focus, it felt important, even to him. The group of shooters continued their noisy display, firing quickly, showing off new attachments on their rifles, laughing at their own jokes. But even their laughter seemed to lose some strength as they noticed how long Clara was standing, unmoving, her eyes fixed on the target. There was something unsettling about her silence, though none of them would admit it. Minutes passed. Clara didn't fire. Instead, she lowered the rifle again, adjusting her grip slightly. She checked the scope once more, then wiped a small smudge on the lens with the corner of her sleeve. Her movements were calm, unhurried, as if time belonged to her alone. This patience was strange to the group. They thrived on speed, on showing off how fast they could shoot, how many bullets they could fire in a short span. To them, Clara looked like a beginner who didn't know what she was doing. And yet, deep inside, a small seed of doubt was growing. No beginner they knew carried herself with such quiet confidence. Clara lifted the rifle once more, her cheek resting gently against the stock. She looked through the scope, her eye sharp, her breath even. The target was clear now, as if nothing else existed. The laughter around her faded into a distant hum. She could hear only her heartbeat, steady and strong, guiding her toward the perfect moment. She didn't rush. She didn't force it. She waited. The boy whispered again, "Dad, why hasn't she fired yet?" His father's reply was soft but certain. "Because she's waiting for the silence inside her. That's when the shot will matter." Clara inhaled slowly, then released the air, her body becoming still in that brief pause between breaths. Her finger curled slightly around the trigger, not pulling yet, just resting. She could feel the energy gathering, like the quiet before a storm. The group continued their noise, but even they glanced more often now at Clara, curious despite themselves. She had been standing there so long, yet she didn't look nervous or lost. She looked steady. And in that steadiness, the build-up reached its peak. Clara was ready. The range, once filled with laughter and arrogance, now seemed to hold its breath. One more moment, one more breath, and she would show them what silence could do. The room felt heavier now, though no one had said it aloud. The noise of shots from other lanes, the laughter from the arrogant group, the faint chatter of spectators, all of it was there, yet a strange hush had settled over the shooting range. Everyone's attention kept drifting back to Clara. She had not fired a single bullet yet, but her presence alone was shifting the atmosphere. Clara's finger rested lightly on the trigger. She could feel the rifle's weight pressed against her shoulder, the familiar comfort of its wood and steel grounding her. Through the scope, the target looked close, the black circle in the center sharp against the white paper. She inhaled slowly, then let the air slip out of her lungs. Her body steadied, her heartbeat slowed, and in that narrow pause between breaths, everything else disappeared. She pulled the trigger. The crack of the rifle split the air like thunder. It was louder than any shot that had come before, not because the weapon itself was special, but because of the silence that followed. For a moment, the entire range froze. No laughter. No whispers. Even those mid-conversation turned their heads toward Clara's lane. The bullet struck the target dead center. Not near it. Not close enough to be mistaken. Perfectly in the middle. The paper tore in a small, clean hole, leaving no doubt. The group of shooters who had mocked her earlier stared at the target in disbelief. Their eyes darted back to Clara, then to the target again, as if trying to convince themselves they had seen it wrong. But the evidence was there, clear as day, a flawless bullseye. The young boy watching with his father gasped loudly, his face lighting up with excitement. "She did it, Dad. Right in the middle." His father smiled, his eyes still fixed on Clara, and nodded. "Yes, son. That's what patience looks like." Clara lowered her rifle slowly, her movements calm and unhurried. She didn't celebrate, didn't turn to see the faces around her. To her, this was not about proving anyone wrong. It was about proving to herself that patience, silence, and skill would always find their moment. But for everyone else, the shot had changed something. The once loud group of shooters stood awkwardly, their smugness slipping away. One of them, the tall man with the trimmed beard, had been mid-laugh before she fired. Now his grin was gone, his mouth slightly open as he stared at the target. He muttered something under his breath, but no one heard. The woman in flashy gear adjusted her glasses nervously, forcing a laugh that came out shaky. "Beginner's luck," she said, though even she didn't sound convinced. Her friends didn't respond. They were too busy trying to understand how the woman they had mocked for so long had just silenced them with a single shot. Other shooters at the range began to whisper, their voices filled with awe. "Did you see that? Straight through the middle. I thought she was a beginner." Look at that shot. She didn't even flinch. Their words carried across the room, a quiet chorus of respect that grew with every passing second. Clara stood still, her eyes calm. She didn't bow, didn't smile proudly, didn't respond to the whispers. Instead, she quietly cleaned her rifle, brushing off the faint smoke that lingered near the barrel. Her movements were graceful, almost ritual-like. To her, the shot was finished. There was no need for celebration. But the silence it left behind was powerful. The instructor walked back to her lane, his face showing more emotion now than it had earlier. He looked at the target, then back at Clara. That, he said slowly, was one of the cleanest shots I've seen in a long time. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed his surprise. He had not expected this from the quiet woman with the old rifle. Clara gave him a small nod, nothing more. She wasn't here for praise, but she accepted his words with quiet dignity. The boy tugged at his father's arm again, his voice full of wonder. "Dad, do you think she could do it again?" His father chuckled softly. "Son, people like her don't need to do it again. Once is enough." The group of arrogant shooters still hovered nearby, their pride wounded. The bearded man finally spoke, his tone less confident now. "It's just one shot," he said quickly, as if convincing himself. "Anyone can get lucky once." But no one responded. Even his own friends avoided his eyes. They had all seen the way Clara had stood, the calmness in her movements, the steadiness in her breathing. That was not luck. That was skill, real skill, the kind none of them had shown despite all their expensive equipment and loud boasting. Clara remained unbothered by their silence. She set her rifle down gently and took a small sip of water from her bottle. Around her, the noise of the range began to return, but it was different now. Quieter. More thoughtful. The arrogance that had filled the room earlier seemed to have faded, replaced by a new sense of respect. The young boy's excitement had spread. Others in the range who had witnessed the shot kept glancing at Clara, some with admiration, others with curiosity. A few even felt inspired. She hadn't said a single word to defend herself, but her single shot had spoken louder than anything else could. The tall man tried one last time to salvage his pride. He raised his rifle quickly and fired off another shot. The bullet landed near the target's edge, far from the center. He forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow. His friends didn't cheer this time. They only looked away, embarrassed for him. Clara quietly prepared to leave. She packed her rifle into its cloth case, folded her towel neatly, and gathered her small belongings. She moved with the same patience she had shown before firing the shot. Nothing about her suggested she had just embarrassed an entire group of people. To her, the day was simple, she had come to shoot, and she had done so. That was enough. As she walked toward the exit, the boy's voice rang out again, loud and innocent. "She's the best one here." His father placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, smiling. "Yes, son." And she never needed to say a word. Clara's footsteps were soft as she left the range. Behind her, the once snobby shooters stood in silence, their laughter gone, their pride shaken. Around them, others whispered still about the single shot that had silenced everyone. The world outside was calm, the sun shining warmly as Clara walked to her car. She placed her rifle carefully in the back seat, slid into the driver's seat, and closed the door. For her, it was just another day, a day when patience, quiet strength, and discipline had spoken louder than arrogance ever could. But for everyone else inside that range, it was a day they would never forget. A single shot had changed the atmosphere, broken pride, and reminded them all that true skill doesn't come from wealth, fancy gear, or loud words. It comes from silence, focus, and the steady hand of someone who doesn't need to prove themselves because the truth reveals itself in a single moment. And Clara, with her quiet presence and her old rifle, had just shown them all exactly what that moment looked like. The air inside the shooting range lingered heavy even after Clara's shot had already echoed away. People tried to return to their practice, but the energy was different now. Every so often, someone glanced at the target with the perfect bullseye, then back at Clara, who moved quietly, packing her things with calm hands. The laughter, the arrogance, the careless noise that had filled the room earlier seemed to have melted into silence. Clara tied the cloth case around her rifle, folding it gently as if handling something precious. Her motions were slow and respectful, each one showing the care she had always been taught to give the weapon. To her, the rifle wasn't just steel and wood. It was a memory of her father, a reminder of lessons he had given her about patience, humility, and focus. While others carried their weapons like trophies, she treated hers like an old friend. The group of shooters who had mocked her stood uneasily near their lane. Their once confident postures had faded. The tall man with the beard avoided looking directly at her, his face tense as he fumbled with his rifle. The woman with flashy glasses adjusted them nervously, though they didn't need adjusting. Their jokes had vanished, replaced with a silence that made their earlier arrogance feel small and foolish. Others in the range noticed too. A few people nodded toward Clara respectfully as she walked past. Some even smiled softly, not daring to disturb her calm, but wanting to show they admired what she had done. The young boy, still holding his father's hand, kept staring at her with wide eyes. To him, she was no longer just a quiet woman in simple clothes. She was someone who had just proven that greatness didn't need noise or show, it needed silence and focus. As Clara walked slowly toward the door, the boy pulled at his father's sleeve. "Dad, can I be like her one day?" His father knelt down slightly, his voice quiet but firm. "You can, son. But remember what made her different. It wasn't her rifle. It wasn't the clothes she wore. It was her patience, her respect, and the way she didn't let anyone shake her. If you can learn that, then yes, you can be like her." The boy nodded eagerly, his eyes never leaving Clara until she disappeared out the door. Meanwhile, the tall bearded man finally broke the silence within his group. "She just got lucky," he muttered, but the words lacked strength. His friends didn't laugh this time. One of them shifted uncomfortably, then said quietly, "That wasn't luck. You saw how she stood. You saw how steady she was. None of us can do that." His words hung in the air, heavy with truth. The bearded man clenched his jaw but didn't reply. Deep inside, he knew it too. Clara stepped out into the sunlight. The air outside was fresh, carrying the scent of nearby grass and earth. She paused for a moment, taking a deep breath, letting the warmth of the sun replace the heaviness of the room she had just left. For her, this was enough. She didn't need applause or recognition. Her silence, her shot, and her calmness were reward enough. She walked to her old car, its paint slightly faded, its frame carrying the marks of years gone by. It wasn't new, wasn't shiny, but it was hers. Just like her rifle, it had carried her faithfully. She opened the door, placed her rifle gently inside, and sat down behind the wheel. For a moment, she simply sat, her hands resting on the steering wheel, her thoughts quiet. Then she started the car and drove away, leaving behind a range that would not forget her anytime soon. Inside, the atmosphere shifted again. Conversations started softly, almost cautiously. People spoke about the shot, about the way she had stood, about the silence she had kept while others mocked her. Some admired her discipline. Others felt a quiet shame about how quickly they had judged her when she walked in. The instructor gathered a few of the younger shooters around, pointing at the target Clara had hit. "That," he said firmly, "is what real shooting looks like. It's not about who talks the loudest. It's not about the newest gear. It's about patience, respect, and control. Remember that." His words carried weight, and the younger shooters listened closely. The group of arrogant shooters, now subdued, packed their rifles in silence. Their earlier laughter felt distant, replaced with embarrassment. They knew people were watching them, not with admiration this time, but with disappointment. No one said it out loud, but it was clear the respect they had once demanded had been stripped away, and all because of one simple woman they had mocked. The young boy, still full of excitement, asked the instructor loudly, "Will she come back here again?" The instructor smiled faintly. "Maybe. But even if she doesn't, one shot like that stays with you forever." And it did. 4 days after, people who had been there told others about the quiet woman who had walked into the range with an old rifle, faced laughter and mockery, and silenced everyone with a single perfect shot. The story spread among the shooters in town, becoming almost like a lesson that traveled further than Clara herself. Clara never knew how many people spoke about her after that day. She didn't need to know. For her, life was about small, quiet victories that shaped who she was. She lived simply, spoke gently, and carried herself with dignity. Her rifle stayed safely with her, used rarely but always with respect. She never went out seeking to impress others, but when the moment came, her skill and patience spoke louder than anything else could. The people who had mocked her remembered the sting of that silence for a long time. It humbled them, made them realize that pride without discipline was empty. Some of them changed quietly, learning to take their practice more seriously, to value patience over show. Others, too proud to admit it, still carried the memory inside, unable to forget the way the range had fallen silent after her shot. The boy who had watched her never forgot her either. To him, she became an example, a reminder of what strength really looked like. Not loud. Not boastful. But calm, steady, and unshakable. And so, while Clara never sought glory, she earned something greater that day. She earned respect, the kind that lasts longer than applause, the kind that humbles arrogance and inspires truth. She had walked in quietly, been mocked openly, and left with her head high, her silence louder than their laughter. Her single shot had done what words could not. It had silenced pride, reminded people of humility, and shown that true power doesn't need to shout. It only needs one clear, perfect moment. And Clara, the simple woman with the old rifle, had found that moment.